For our next devotional, I'm going to go back to the next part of Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. It's a very long story, so we'll go as far as we're ready to. And remember, he's been fighting with Apollyon, who is Satan, and unfortunately, Satan just kept on going, but finally, the Christian brought out his sword, and although he was hurt, he overcame Apollyon. And we know that the leaves that were given to him were for healing, and he was healed immediately. So now the next part of the story. Now at the end of this valley stretched another, called the Valley of the Shadow of Death. It was necessary for Christian to go through it, because the way to the celestial city lay in that direction. Now this valley was a very solitary place. The prophet Jeremiah describes it like this: a wilderness, a land of deserts and pits, a land of drought and of the shadow of death, a land that no man but a Christian passes through, and where no man dwells. Now here Christian was tested more severely than in his fight with Apollyon, as you shall see in the following account. I saw then in my dream that when Christian reached the borders of the shadow of death, he met two men. They were children of the spies who had delivered an evil report about the good land, and who quickly determined to go back. The book says, so they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. Christian spoke to the two men, asking, where are you going? The two said, we're going back. We're definitely going back. And truthfully, we would have you do the same if you value life as peace. Why? Christian looked out at the valley. What's the matter with the way ahead? Matter? The two said together. We were going that way just as you are, and went as far as we dared. In fact, if we had gone on a little further, we wouldn't be here to bring you the good news. But what did you encounter? Christian wanted to know. The men looked at each other and back at Christian. Why, we were almost in the valley of the shadow of death, but by good fortune we looked ahead of us and saw the danger before we came to it. Furrows of frustration gathered between Christian's brows. What? What did you see? See? Why, the valley itself. They leaned closer and almost whispered, it's dark as pitch, and we also saw hobgoblins and satyrs and dragons of the pit. They stood a little straighter and looked over their shoulders. We also heard things in that valley like a continual howling and yelling, sounds of a people in misery, too great for words, people bound in affliction and irons. And besides all that, discouraging clouds of confusion hung over the valley, while death spread his wings and hovered over it. In a word, it was a completely dreadful sight, being surrounded with nothing but disorder. Christian slowly exhaled. While I haven't seen what you describe, it doesn't change the fact that this is my way to the desired haven. The book says our heart has not turned back, and our steps have not deviated from your way, yet you have crushed us in a place of jackals and covered us with the shadow of death. That's Psalms chapter 44, 18 and 19. The two men shrugged. If it's still your way, be that as it may, but we will not choose it for ours. So they parted ways, and Christian went on his way, with his sword still drawn and ready in his hand, for fear he might be assaulted. Then I saw in my dream an overview of the valley. As far as it reached on the right was a very deep ditch. It is this ditch into which the blind have led the blind throughout time, and have both perished miserably. On the left there was a very dangerous bottomless quagmire. If a man should fall into it, even a good man, there is no bottom for his foot to stand on. King David once fell into that quagmire, and would no doubt have been smothered if it wasn't for he who was able, who plucked him out of it. Walking in the dark, Christian was careful to avoid the ditch on the one hand, but the way was so narrow it put him at a risk of tipping the other way into the mire on the left. In the same way, if he tried to avoid the mire without great caution, he found himself on the brink of falling into the ditch. In this way he went on. The effort brought one sigh after another, for besides the dangers of the ditch and the quagmire, the pathway was so dark that he often couldn't see where his next step would land. Now, in about the middle of this valley, I observed the mouth of hell. It stood hard against the narrow way. When Christian saw it, he wondered what he should do because of the flames and smoke that poured from it, not to mention the sparks and hideous noises. These things had no respect for Christian's sword, such as Apollyon had shown. He was forced to put up his sword and take another weapon, called all prayer. The book says, with all prayer and petition, pray at all times in the Spirit, and with this in view, be on the alert, with all perseverance and petition for all the saints. Christian cried out in my hearing, saying, "O Lord, I beg you to deliver my soul." So Christian went on like this for a long time as he continued on the way. Yet the flames still reached towards him, while doleful voices continued their unsettling calls and rushed back and forth to the point that he sometimes thought he would be torn in pieces or tramped upon like mire in the streets. He made slow progress over several miles, surrounded by these frightful sights and dreadful noises. He finally reached a place where he thought he heard a group of fiends approaching to meet him. He stopped. His thoughts raced as he tried to figure out the best thing to do. He played with the idea of turning back. But then again, he thought, he might be halfway through the valley by now. He remembered how he had already overcome many perils, and that the dangers of going back might be much more than those going forward. So he made up his mind to go on. Yet the fiends seemed to draw nearer and nearer to his location. When it seemed they were almost on him, he cried out with the most fervent voice, "I will walk in the strength of the Lord God." And with that the fiends drew back and came no further. One thing I shouldn't forget to mention is how poor Christian looked so confused. As I watched him, it was like he didn't even know his own voice. Just when he came to the mouth of the burning pit, one of the wicked ones sneaked up behind him. It whispered softly into his ear, with many suggestive and distressing blasphemies. Christian thought these blasphemies had originated in his own mind, and it troubled him deeply. As he continued on his journey, the thought that he could possibly blaspheme the one who had loved him so much weighed heavily on him. In fact, it tested Christian more than anything he had met with before. If he could have helped it, he would not have done it, but he didn't have the foresight to either stop his ears or to understand the real source of these blasphemies. When Christian had traveled in this depressed condition for a significant amount of time, he thought he heard the voice of a man on the way ahead of him, saying, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me." As a result, gladness filled Christian's heart for these reasons. First, because he gathered from what he heard that others who feared God were in this valley along with him. Secondly, since he understood that God was with them, even in such a dark and dismal place, he reasoned that his invisible presence was with him in spite of the hindrances of such a place. Thirdly, he hoped to catch up and enjoy some fellowship with the man ahead, and thought about calling to him, though he didn't know what to say, for he had also thought himself to be alone. Finally, the light of morning dawned, and Christian said, "He has turned the shadow of death into morning." Now, in light of the new day, he looked back, not because he wanted to go back the way he had come, but to see more clearly what hazards he had navigated in the dark. He could see the ditch perfectly on the one side, the quagmire on the other, along with just how narrow the way was, which lay between them. He could also see the hobgoblins, the satyrs and dragons of the pit, but they kept their distance. Apparently, after the break of day, they were reluctant to come near, yet he saw them in fulfillment of that which is written, "He reveals mysteries from the darkness and brings the deep darkness into light." Christian was greatly encouraged that he had made it through all the dangers of his solitary journey so far. He could now see these dangers, though he feared them more than ever, because the light of day exposed them. So the rising sun offered even more mercy to Christian, because it's important to note that though the first part of the valley of the shadow of death was dangerous, This second part, which stretched ahead of him, was, if possible, far more dangerous. From the place where he currently stood, he could see that throughout the remainder of the valley, the way was full of snares, traps, gins, and nets. Along with that, the depths were so full of pits, pitfalls, deep holes, and unsafe ledges that if it had been dark now, like it was when he came to the first part of the way, even if he had 1,000 souls, they all would have been lost. But as I said, the sun was now rising. Then, said he, his lamp shone over my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. Christian made it to the end of the valley, walking in the light. Now I saw in my dream that at the end of the valley lay blood, bones, ashes, mangled bodies of men, even of pilgrims who had gone this way earlier. While I pondered the possible reasons for such remains, I spotted a little cave ahead of me where two giants, Pope and Pagan, lived in old times. It was by their power and tyranny that the men whose bones, blood, and ashes and other remains lay in this place were cruelly put to death. But Christian passed by this place without much danger, and it somewhat surprised me. But I have learned that Pagan has been dead many a day. As for the other, though he is still alive, because of his old age and many shrewd conflicts from his younger days, he has grown so crazy and stiff in his joints that he can do little more than sit in his cave's mouth, grinning at pilgrims as they go by, and biting his nails in frustration because he can no longer intercept them. So Christian went on his way, but he didn't know what to think of the old man sitting at the mouth of the cave, especially because Pope was unable to approach him, though he spoke to him, saying, "You will never mend till more of you are burned." But Christian held his peace and smiled as he went by, and suffered no harm. Then he sang a song. O world of wonders, I can say no less, that I should be preserved in that distress I have met with here. O blessed be the hand that from it has delivered me. Dangers and darkness, devils, hell, and sin did surround me while I this vale was in. Snares, pits, traps, and nets did lie about my path, that worthless I might have been caught, entangled, and cast down. But since I live, let Jesus wear the crown. Now, as Christian went on his way, he came to a slight incline designed to allow pilgrims to see more easily ahead. From up there, Christian went along, and looking up, he saw Faithful in the distance, intent on his journey. Christian cried out loudly to get his attention. "Here, here, look here! Wait, and let me catch up to you, and I'll be your companion." At that, Faithful looked behind him. Christian cried out again, wait until I catch up to you." But Faithful answered, "No, I travel with my life at stake."